From bureaus worldwide, this is...
Thank you, Simon Marks. Hey, how you doing? Welcome to the Richie Allen Radio Show, Tuesday, September 1st. It's good to be back. I hope you're in good form. I'm in great form, had a lovely break. And I'm looking forward to the coming season of radio shows. Tuesday's programme, two terrific guests lined up for you today.
It's the BBG, not the BBC. You're listening to the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford in Greater Manchester.
It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Yeah, that didn't take long, did it? Vernon Coleman, Dr. Vernon Coleman, returns to the programme this hour. He'll be with me around about 1:30. You don't want to miss him, the old man in the chair. Lots to talk about with Vernon, undoubtedly. And Brian Sylvester has been a public servant in the Crewe, Nantwich area for over 40 years. He got in touch with the programme when I was on holiday. He's strongly opposed to lockdown, and he's asked to come on and have a chat about a campaign that he's running which relates to accident and emergency rules or laws or regulations that will come in this year. Very serious stuff that will affect very many people, not only in Crewe but elsewhere too. So Brian Sylvester, public servant, joins the programme second hour. He's got a huge following on social media. Vernon Coleman before that, and that is Tuesday's Richie Allen Radio Show. You had a lovely break, thank you very much. It's lovely, it always is nice to get away. And if you're like me then, and you really do get away, and you stop reading the papers and you stop listening to the news, which I do, it's a proper break, you know. No busman's holiday for me. I don't listen to anything. I don't open any emails really. And yeah, so I've had a lovely time. Spent a week in Windermere, or Troutbeck Bridge, which is about a mile from Windermere. That was lovely. Mostly gorgeous weather, apart from one day. The dogs loved it, in and out of Grassmere Lake and Windermere Lake. And I'm looking forward to the coming weeks now. The autumn season of your Richie Allen Radio Show. Before I go any further, I want to say hi to John Foley, a lovely man, a really, really great bloke who is very well known, of course, in Liverpool. He was on the programme to talk to me just before I went on holiday 3 weeks ago to talk about the historic St. John's Market, which hadn't opened. Everything else had opened, shops, stores, pubs, restaurants, and the traders there were very worried, and they were taking on Liverpool Council. And I'm glad to tell you, you might know if you follow John on Twitter, that the market is now back open thanks to the traders standing up to the local authority and to the mayor. So well done to John Foley and your colleagues at St. John's Market. I'm looking forward to getting up there in the next few weeks, one weekend, to have a beer with John, whom I've never met. I'm sure I've passed him many a time in my Liverpool visits, but I'm looking forward to meeting John and having a pint of Guinness with him. So how are you doing yourself, work-wise? Tweet me, of course. We'll do a phone-in early next week, maybe Monday. A lot of stuff to laugh at. You just got to laugh at some of the stuff. They're adding more and more things to the list. What things, Baldy, you cry? Well, things that might be COVID-19 related, you know. And the latest is swollen testicles. Swollen balls, blue balls, a larger than usual scrotum. Might be COVID, according to the Daily Mail yesterday. Everything is COVID. Doesn't matter from now on in. Got a sharp pain in your neck. Got a bit of a pain in your shoulder. When you walk too quick, you get a bit of a pain in your knee. It's all COVID. That's where it's going. School children supposedly back today. Are they? Primary school opposite Buell Hill Park was ominously quiet at 7:30 this morning as I was leaving said park. So I don't know. Have your children gone back? Let me know via Twitter. Secondary school children have to wear masks now in the corridors and the communal areas. What else is in the news? Extinction Rebellion are back annoying the piss out of people in London. Sweaty, grubby. No sign of anyone getting arrested and presented with a £10,000 fine in London, though. We'll come back to that one in a few minutes. And I did see the video while I was away of the cop shooting the black man 7 times in the back. Mental, you heard. Not about that, but you heard about another shooting on the news at the top of the hour. Culture wars, identity wars rumble on. Chaos. And the architects of this reality love chaos, don't they? Little has changed since I was away. Bit of breaking news to kick off with, though. Very important, this bit of breaking news. Love a bit of breaking news. Here's our Sky's presenter, Sarah Hewson.
And a cabinet meeting with something of a difference this morning taking place in the Foreign Office because they needed the more space for social distancing. One member of the cabinet seemed to forget about that, though, this morning, Beth.
Yes, Beth Rigby is Sky's political editor. This is a big story. Somebody forgot about social distancing. Come on, Ben.
Yeah, that's right. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, lost his mind for a moment and went and...
He lost his mind?
And gave someone a handshake. Well,
and shook somebody's hand?
The olden days, that would be a perfectly pleasant thing to do.
Yeah, back in the olden days, it was a perfectly normal thing to do, to greet somebody with an old shake of the hand. In the olden days. But now... Oh, no.
A way to greet someone you haven't seen for a while, but obviously, now we are all social distancing. That was a mistake he made.
It was a massive mistake.
He subsequently apologised, and I do think one of the public health messages, certainly from the government going into the autumn, will be about washing hands, retaining social distancing and retaining space, because it is the number one way of trying to prevent the spread of coronavirus. So a bit of a slip up this morning from the Defence Secretary. He has subsequently apologised.
He's apologised. Damn right too. You're not dreaming this. Blokes are apologising for greeting one another in a time-honoured tradition that dates back to when Moses was in short trousers. Olden times. She said that. In the olden times it was perfectly respectable to shake somebody's hand, but this is the new normal. You don't do that. Also unchanged in my 2-week absence is the constant reminders that we're stuck with the measures until a vaccine is available. Now, Chris Smith is a virologist and a lecturer. He's an expert, allegedly. He also makes podcasts for BBC Radio 5 Live. And Breakfast Nicky Campbell wanted to know this morning, what's happening, Chris? Where are we? This was Chris Smith's response.
Well, at the moment, we're still waiting for the data and the trials are still ongoing. I think this has suffered something of another setback in the last couple of weeks, though, because you'll have probably seen the story of the individual from China, this guy who was from Hong Kong who caught coronavirus back in March, April time. He was ill enough to be hospitalised with it, and he then recovered from his infection, tested negative, so we know that he cleared the virus from his system, but then in recent weeks reacquired the infection.
He caught it again!
He was in Spain and then came through Heathrow, went back to Hong Kong and was picked up by screening on returning to Hong Kong and had coronavirus again. But the difference this time... Exactly right. And
asymptomatic.
And the difference this time was that because the virus he picked up had a slightly different genetic signature, researchers there at Hong Kong University could prove he'd picked the virus up for a second time and it was a different virus. It wasn't just that he continued to carry the original infection since he first picked it up. And that's a bit of a worry, because what it suggests is that the immune response you make, even when you're very ill, ill enough to end up in hospital with this infection, could mean that you don't produce very long immune response. We think his immune response dwindled, making him susceptible again. In the US, a report similar has now been published as well, suggesting that this is not a one-off. It may be that there's a proportion of people for whom this applies. Now, obviously, if the virus infection itself can't make you adequately immune, then a vaccine is less likely to do so.
You hear that? If the virus infection itself cannot generate an immune response from the body, well, he says the vaccine is not going to be able to do it either. So there is a worry that at least a proportion of people, even if we do have a vaccine, it might not work. Yeah, but their answer to that is, well, we'll just have about 50 different vaccines. We'll have loads of them, and we'll keep giving them to you until one does work. Chris Smith there. Right, any more from Chris Smith? A little bit more. They get into buying vaccines and the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
This virus continues to be a major headache for us, but at the moment trials are ongoing. There's 170 plus projects going on around the world. 24 of them are in clinical trials now, so it's a question of waiting or going and shopping at the Kremlin. Because Vladimir Putin has got his vaccine off the shelves in record time, says he's got orders for 20 countries for 1 billion doses of that, and he also has invented a crystal ball because he knows that it will give you immunity for 2 years, apparently.
Sputnik in a test tube.
So go and buy Sputnik from Vlad and knock down prices. No trials, no safety record, but it'll probably be fine.
Yeah, the thing is...
Man also does used cars.
all the men and women in white coats who are working, I think you said 100.
Yeah, this is dreadful by Campbell, of course. I wonder, did anybody complain Campbell to Ofcom this morning? Not that it would make any difference. Campbell really should stop him there, this virologist who works for the BBC, and say, listen, the Russians say that they've tested their vaccine. The Russians say that their method of producing it is a bit different. It's time-honoured. It's a proven method. It's safe, and they've got orders. They're not here to defend themselves. But Campbell just laughs along with the guy.
You said 170. This is the thing. I'm off at the moment because my daughter had COVID.
Nicky Campbell's daughter had COVID. This is why he's now broadcasting from home and not from Salford Quays.
She's 21, coming on 22. Hardly brushed her.
Hardly brushed her. She had COVID, but it hardly brushed her. You wouldn't know.
I feel slightly tired for one day.
She was tired for one day. That's what COVID did to her.
That's the devilish thing about this virus, isn't it?
Yeah. That's Nicky Campbell and Chris Smith of the BBC there. Now, you'll be aware that the Unite for Freedom gathering in Trafalgar Square last weekend, Saturday, I think, attracted a fairly massive crowd, at least 30,000, maybe more. There was more in Berlin again. Doctors and academics addressed the crowd and gave a very alternative view of COVID-19, what it is and the response to it. Learned men and women. Qualified men and women. Now, our friend Piers Corbyn spoke there, and he's a physicist, Piers, and a meteorologist, and was yet again arrested. And he was held for 10 hours and told he'd be fined £10,000. Don't worry too much about that. It'll never happen. I chatted with him earlier on, and he'll be with me on tomorrow's programme. So he was invited onto ITV's Good Morning Britain show, and it's worth hearing a couple of sound bites from it. It's a beautiful illustration of television news in 2020. All that is wrong with it, I should add. So you've got Piers Morgan then, former buddy of Donald Trump, hosting with Susanna Reid. And Piers Morgan tells our Piers Corbyn that 800,000 people have died worldwide of COVID. That's a fact, and you would be lying if you denied it. Over to Piers Corbyn then.
Well, 800,000 people have died and they've been labelled COVID when it might have been completely something else. It is not a pandemic because the numbers dying are nothing different from a normal year of people dying, whereas they die all the time. And secondly, it is not a high consequence infectious disease, and that was declared by the government and the World Health Organization on March the 19th. So,
Brilliant work by Piers Corbyn. Declared in early March that it's not a high consequence infectious disease, no big deal really. And the numbers, when you put them together, even if you believe them, they don't show any real escalation year on year in terms of global deaths attributed to respiratory infections or viruses. He's killed them with a bit of facts there. Very good.
What we have is a psychological operation to close down the economy in the interests of mega corporations who are going to gain out of massive joblessness happening upon us now.
More than 40,000 people have died in this country.
She's a bit dim, isn't she? The government itself admitted that the numbers were skewed badly. It acknowledged this. The week before the week I went on holiday, they acknowledged that people were being signed off as having died of COVID, even if they got knocked down by a car 2 months after having COVID. So 40,000 is nonsense.
Country as a result of COVID directly.
Yeah, people are dying all the time,
Piers
and they're labelled COVID.
No, hear this garbage. It's not an insult. He's talking facts.
Their family. To say it's some kind of...
They love playing this emotional card. Oh, you're insulting the families of those who died. No, I'm not. I'm just telling you the cold hard facts. It hasn't killed 800,000 people worldwide. They've acknowledged that the counting and collating of that data is flawed in the extreme love, is what I would be saying to her.
Fiction.
Well, listen to Dr.
boost
Vernon Coleman.
international pharmaceutical companies.
Listen, well, it is boosting pharmaceutical companies and big telecom, who are making billions and billions out of this, while the ordinary British worker is going to the wall, losing jobs.
If those pharma companies are coming up with
for
treatments that can help people who are suffering and potentially find a vaccine that can prevent long-term illness and death.
There's no need for a vaccine.
That is entirely justified,
no.
isn't it?
Vaccines
it's not
cause
fiction
death.
In order
The
to
history
boost
of
them.
Listen to me. You're interrupting. The history of recent modern vaccines shows they make people more ill. There is already a cure for these COVID symptoms, namely chloroquine and zinc. So there's no need for a vaccine whatsoever, except to make money for the mega corporations and the pharmaceutical industry.
Mr. Corbyn,
there's no need for it. You should scrap it because you, the viewers, are paying for it.
Mr. Corbyn, if you may let me jump in.
Jumps in. So Morgan jumps in and repeats his belief that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work and it's a lie to say otherwise. So our Piers Corbyn reminds Morgan that it is the opinion of doctors, the doctors who went public in the United States, that they used it and found it effective against this respiratory infection, whatever it is, which is true. And whether you like it or not, those are qualified doctors. They've earned the right to their opinion. Let's hear a little bit more of it.
No, the doctors who've done it have said so, and it works.
No, they haven't.
And there's no evidence yet from Boris Johnson that we have a virus. Maybe there's a virus, maybe there's not.
I don't mind you coming on and talking about these things, but if you're going to state bald lies...
But he's not lying. We all saw the video of the doctors in Texas. Real doctors now, at least by the establishment criteria, okay? Academic people who got their medicine degree, their medical degree, and then went to work in hospitals or in private practice. They've said, and I don't know if it works or not, what would I know about hydroxychloroquine? Nothing, nada. But it is true that some qualified men and women, at least system qualified men and women, have said they've used it and they found it effective. That's not a lie, it's a fact.
Like hydroxychloroquine being a cure for COVID-19, that is simply not true.
I'm relying on expert doctors. Doctors say this, and I suggest what you say isn't true.
You're relying on conspiracy theorists' whack jobs.
Conspiracy theorists' whack jobs.
And you're not taking account of studies that have been done on
They're so bad, Reid and Morgan, that they end up not just shouting over the guest, but shouting over one another. This is high comedy, this, and to be absolutely fair to Piers Corbyn, and he deserves it, his conduct is absolutely first class through this nonsense. He just sits there, waits for his opportunity, drops a couple of alternative opinions and drops a couple of facts and lets them get on with the arguing and screaming.
on hydroxychloroquine.
On
you
vaccines,
just use phrases like conspiracy theory when you've got nothing to say.
Okay, on vaccines, what happened with measles if vaccines don't work?
Yes, these are earlier type of vaccines. I'm talking about modern vaccines.
Did it work
more people
then? The vaccine for measles, did that work?
Flu.
Did it work?
It might well have worked, but the vaccines of the past are different from the ones now, which have many additives.
Hugely important fact that. I'm not talking about the vaccines of yesteryear, says Piers. I'm talking about modern day vaccines, which are made up, the makeup of which is entirely different to vaccines of yore. Very good point.
Which are in general dangerous, and the statistics show that more people get lower immune systems when they've had vaccines.
Let's bring in Dr. Hillary.
Someone who is an expert doctor who may be very concerned, frankly, about what you're saying. Dr. Hillary.
So they've got some bloke called Dr. Hillary. He's been a breakfast television doctor for about 40 years or 30 years. They bring him on.
Extremely dangerous, what we've just heard from Mr. Corbyn. His statements are littered with errors, absolutely littered with dangerous errors.
Well, I can't think of a dangerous error that put out or offered by Piers Corbyn. He claimed, the only claim he has made, two claims. Claim number one, of course, hydroxychloroquine has been claimed by real doctors to work. That's a fact, whether you agree with it or not. And then he said vaccines are different now than they used to be, with adjuvants and additives that are dangerous. That's all he said, really. And none of that is beyond, I would suggest, the grasp of most reasonably minded people.
Hydroxychloroquine and zinc, for example, completely dissed by hundreds of different experts.
No,
let me tell you about the virus not existing.
The
virus has been identified.
So they're all piling in on him. It's absolute crap. And in the end, they decide to get rid of Piers, but not before one or two ad hominem attacks on his opinions on other things like climate change.
Piers Corbyn, I think we've heard the expert evidence from the doctor, and we'll have to bring the interview to an end.
Piers Corbyn, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question.
Do you believe
Piers
DNA and RNA rather than finding a virus?
Piers Corbyn, let me ask you another question.
They have not found a virus.
Do we have to?
Mr. Corbyn, I understand.
There may be one, there may be not. Give them a chance.
Mr. Corbyn,
yes,
do you believe there is a link between 5G masts and COVID?
Well, that's the question is not correctly posed. The important thing to understand is that electromagnetic radiation, 4G, 5G, and normal Wi-Fi, which is mostly 4G, do lower your immune systems, and the statistics show very clearly, and this is proven by objective tests going over years, that those things do decrease.
It's actually complete nonsense, isn't it? What you've just said is, with respect, it's utter nonsense.
Measurements show
it isn't nonsense, and this is very telling. When Corbyn claims that it has been known for many, many, many years, there are peer-reviewed papers on it, that exposure to non-ionising radiation can be and is in fact very dangerous. When Morgan interrupts to say it's nonsense, it's nonsense, it's nonsense, what he should be doing, Morgan, is asking Piers Corbyn, name some of these people then. Name some of these people who have published papers or written articles saying that non-ionising radiation is unsafe. But he doesn't do that. He just continues to insult him. And it goes on and on and on and on. And in the end of it, you end up with them attacking him for his opinions on man-made climate change and more ad hominem stuff before ending the interview. I thought he did a fantastic job. He'll be on this programme with me tomorrow. Piers Corbyn, 26 minutes past the hour, or just about 26. I'm looking at the clock because Vernon Coleman will be with me in a couple of minutes. Just before that, though, I've got to get this in. It's very important, this. Let me get this in. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, briefed the House of Commons today. His opposite number was there, of course, John Ashworth. In his statement, Matt Hancock said this. Listen carefully, very important.
The best case scenario remains a vaccine this year. While no vaccine technology is certain, since the House last met, vaccine trials have gone well. The Oxford vaccine continues to be the world leader. And we've now contracted with 6 different vaccine providers so that whichever comes off, we can get access in this country. While we give vaccine development all our support, we will insist on safety and efficacy. I can update the House on changes to legislation that I propose to bring forward in the coming weeks to ensure that a vaccine approved by the MHRA can be deployed here whether or not it has a European licence, because the MHRA standards are equal to the highest in the world. And furthermore, on the development of the vaccine, which proceeds at pace, I will shortly ask the House to approve a broader range of qualified clinical personnel who can deploy the vaccine in order of clinical priority, again, as I mentioned in questions.
What he said there is we're going to get he said a broader range of clinical personnel. We're going to have more dispensers of vaccines than ever before. We're going to get people who wouldn't ordinarily be administering vaccines. We're going to get them to administer vaccines. And I don't know what he means by that. They're going to publish info on this in the next week or so. Maybe it'll be I can't imagine it'll be police, but I would imagine the army will be involved, because they really want everybody to have this vaccine.
Because as well as the potential vaccine, we also have a flu vaccination programme, the biggest flu vaccination programme in history to roll out this year.
Right, keep that in mind. So he mentioned the MHRA there, in case you don't know. The MHRA is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. Okay? And he talks about it here again in response to the Shadow Health Secretary John Ashworth's statement. He then talks about the MHRA. Listen carefully. Very important, this.
On the vaccine, he raised the point that a vaccine must only be deployed when safe and effective, and he's completely right. He and I are as one, along with every single member of this House, in our abhorrence at the anti-vax people who peddle lies, and abhorrence actually at the anti-test people who similarly try to argue that testing is somehow wrong when it is not. In the UK, a vaccine will only be deployed when it is safe and it's signed off by the regulator. The MHRA, the UK health regulator, is one of the finest regulators in the world. It is robust, it is independent, and it is technically brilliant.
It's robust, independent, and technically brilliant. The regulator of medicinal products in the UK, listen again,
is one of the finest regulators in the world. It is robust, it is independent.
It's robust and it's independent. The MHRA put out a press release back in September last year. Do you want to hear the headline? MHRA and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to look at the safer, effective use of medicines during pregnancy. Billy poison jabs. Let's read a bit of it. This is the independent MHRA. In advance of World Patient Safety Day, MHRA specialists, as part of a broader programme of work, have begun developing groundbreaking research to support the safer use of medicine during pregnancy. A $360,000 grant over 2 years from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation will support the MHRA's research to help predict the need for adjusting a medicine's dose during different trimesters of pregnancy. Hardly independent. It receives funding from a man who wants every one of God's children and God's adults on God's green earth to be stuck with one of his jabs several times a year. Astonishing stuff. There was a time when lying to Parliament was a very serious offence and it might have ended a career. Not these days. This is the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford. Vernon Coleman joins me in a couple of minutes' time. Right, the Bellamy Brothers on the Richie Allen Radio Show. 28 minutes to the top of the hour. Tuesday show. Great to be back with you. Lots of tweets on the interview, if you want to call it that, between Piers Corbyn and the GMB crew this morning. That entire interview is available on YouTube at the GMB YouTube channel. Good Morning Britain, if you want to watch it in its entirety. Speaking of YouTube channels, my first guest today is no stranger to you whatsoever. He's a brilliant man, very humble, very kind man, hugely successful author. His book selling millions and millions of copies around the world. Of course, he wrote for the national press in this country for many, many years on medical matters, and served as a GP for many years with great distinction. These days you can find him on YouTube with a hugely popular broadcast. He broadcasts 3 or 4 times a week, although lately some of those excellent videos have been taken down by Google. We'll talk about that in a minute. The old man in the chair himself. Delighted to be opening the autumn season of the Richie Allen Show with Dr. Vernon Coleman again. Vernon, thanks so much for coming back on. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, young man. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Do you know what? Could I ask you to maybe disconnect and reconnect again? There's a bit of a bug on the line. Yeah, I have a feeling I know what's going on there. It happens every now and then. Vernon is going to reconnect, and hopefully we'll have a clearer line, and then we'll get straight into it with him. He did tell me this morning in an email that he came across a little bit of skullduggery by the BBC in the last couple of weeks. Namely, bbc.co.uk published an article which was potentially libelous, and that article then was taken down very quickly, but not before he managed to screenshot it. I'm hoping that's a better line now. Welcome back, Vernon. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, Richie. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a good bit better now. I'm delighted.
Good.
Welcome back. The frequency with which your videos are disappearing from YouTube, well, it's happening more and more often. I understand quite a few of if I can say episodes, Vernon, have disappeared in the last week alone. Is that right?
I think about 5. They took one down this morning that only went up on Sunday. about healthcare. I'm not quite sure why they got so excited about that, but the censors are working overtime and taking them down pretty well as fast as I can put them up, which is why I keep telling people to put them up on other platforms so that they still survive. It's scary what's happening. I used to have a LinkedIn, God knows why, but I used to have a LinkedIn thing, and that's disappeared. And everywhere you look, the censorship, the banning is incredible. I've never known anything like it. And the abuse that people who were trying to tell the truth are receiving is quite phenomenal. The people for want of a better expression, the people on the other side of the fence seem to think they can do whatever they like and get away with it.
They do, yeah. And there's a huge question about the hegemony of Google and YouTube, and the fact that it isn't. It claims that it's a private company, and that as a private company, it invites people to use its services for free, and it retains the right thereafter to remove anything that it deems harmful. But it isn't just a private company. It's got the size of, now I wouldn't say a state actor, but it's more like a continent actor now. Everybody in the world is on there. It's about time some government had a look at Google and YouTube and its censorship policies, Vernon, right?
Absolutely. They used to have a right of appeal. I don't get a right of appeal anymore, and they say they have terms of service, but terms of conditions of use. But it's a bit like trying to understand. It's a bit like Kafka, you know. It's a cross between Lewis Carroll and Kafka. You can't work out what the devil you can and can't say. It's all quite meaningless. I find the whole way that truth is being suppressed. You know the big demonstration in London on Saturday?
Yeah, which was attended by tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, and don't you think it's strange that Piers Corbyn got fined 10 grand for having a meeting which was the police had authorised, and now the police have authorised Extinction Rebellion, climate change, global warming people, allowed them to have demos in London. I mean, what the hell's going on? Are they a bit blatant, isn't it? We're going to fine you if you have a demonstration that we don't like, but if you have a demonstration that we do like, Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion or whatever, please go ahead, destroy as many buildings as you like, do what the hell you like. The BBC responded to the demonstration on Saturday mostly by ignoring it. In fact, pretty well ignoring it. The only thing I found was on their website, and I have to read you this. It was written by somebody called Mariana Spring, who is described as, and this sounds like a joke, but it's not, specialist disinformation and social media reporter. Specialist disinformation. Now, let me just tell you what she wrote in her tiny little article. What she wrote was that while some protesters in attendance expressed concerns about the impact of lockdown, others held placards featuring false claims. This is editorial, mind you. These included suggestions that Bill Gates is planning to use vaccinations to microchip the population and that the pandemic is a hoax. Now, how Mariana Spring knows what's fact and what isn't fact is a question for her and her editors. But what particularly drew my attention was the final paragraph where she said, open quotes, various pseudoscientists who have spread disinformation online about coronavirus were also scheduled to speak at the London demonstration, close quotes. Now, if I'd been there, I'd be waiting for my cheque for £1 million from the BBC. Three of the speakers that I can think of, Professor Dolores Cahill, Dr. Kevin Corbett, and Dr. Mohammed Ardeel, are all bona fide scientists. And to describe them as pseudoscientists is one of the most vicious libels I think I've ever seen. The BBC, I do please ask your listeners, all write and complain to the BBC, because I do feel that we have to get the media into a corner, because they're running roughshod over us all. We have to complain, put in formal complaints, make them apologise, and I sincerely hope that Mohammed Adil, Dolores Cahill and Kevin Corbett all sue them, because to be described as a pseudoscientist when you are a very well qualified scientist, I mean, you can't think of how many noughts they're going to get on the cheque. That is outrageous. And do you know what? They took it down a little later on Saturday because I suspect somebody saw it, some editor saw it. Well, Mariana Spring, I took a screenshot. So I suggest that if she's listening, Mariana toddles along to her editor and gets the BBC lawyers to come and explain to her how much she's going to cost the BBC, the European Union, and the Ian Brady and Myra Hindley Foundation, all of which fund the BBC.
You could choke on the irony, the BBC appointing. That was a recent appointment as well. I followed that woman on Twitter, Mariana Spring, a very recent appointment. The disinformation reporter. I mean, you don't have to go very far outside of your own office, love, I would say, in my misogynistic way, to look for disinformation. It's a shocking thing. But Ofcom, of course, are not fit for purpose these days. That's the sort of thing, when I worked in commercial media, which I did for many, many years, I would expect to lose my job if I was to characterise an oncologist and a very respected academic as pseudoscientists. I wouldn't expect to be in my job very long. But Ofcom is not fit for purpose, Vernon.
I've done 2 YouTube videos, which are actually still up, which describe BBC hoaxes and the way that the BBC spread misinformation. It is just staggering what they think they can get away with and what they seem to be getting away with. Their idea of checking facts seems to me to be, you know, if they're checking a fact about Ian Brady and Myra Hindley Foundation, they ring up the Ian Brady and Myra Hindley Foundation. They're both dead, so they can't sue me.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about.
I do indeed.
But they just ring them up and say, is it true that? And some spokesperson for the Brady and Hindley Foundation says, oh no, that's not true at all. And so there you go. That's it. It's not true because they said so. Wowee! I'd love to be able to deal with questions as simply as that. What a wretched organisation. The BBC's just become a PR stunt for these people. And of course, just because they get oodles of money, let's give them their right name. The Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is given worked with the BBC. Mustn't say given because they're working alongside them. They have a financial link, a financial relationship, like the EU has a financial relationship with the BBC. And the Bill and Melinda Gates, of course, have a financial relationship with The Guardian. So you can't trust anything The Guardian says. You can't trust anything the BBC says. If I accepted money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or from anybody else for that matter, in that sort of way, I wouldn't expect anyone to be able to take me seriously. So how can any BBC journalist or any Guardian journalist ever expect to be taken seriously again when their organisation is actually working alongside these people that they're supposed to be reporting on? It's not journalism. It's not journalism at all. It's propaganda.
It's worse. You know, I was thinking of you this afternoon. I was getting ready for this and I've got monitors in the studio with BBC 24 and Sky News. And Matt Hancock was addressing the House of Commons. He was making a statement. And in the statement, he was talking about vaccines. And he criticised anti-vaxxers very briefly. And he said that he puts all of his faith in the MHRA. Now, I don't have to tell you about the MHRA as a distinguished doctor, but for our listeners, it's the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. It regulates medicines in this country. It's supposed to be a watchdog on behalf of the public. Incredibly, not once but twice, Matt Hancock today announced that it was the best in the world and it was completely independent. But if you go to the MHRA's own website on gov.uk, they announced back in September last year that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given it nearly $400,000 from last September to last for the next 2 years to help them research medicines for pregnancy trimesters. And that blows straight out of the water the idea that the MHRA is in any way independent. And again, you don't have to be a qualified journalist to find this stuff. It's out there. This is what cheeses me off, you know?
It's very difficult to find anybody independent. Valance, who's the chief scientific officer, he worked for years for GlaxoSmithKline as a director. And Whitty, of course, although the money wasn't given to him personally, but he worked for an organisation which took, I think it was 40 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates. It's almost impossible to find anybody involved in science and medicine and advising governments who hasn't accepted money in one way or another from a vaccine company, a drug company, or the Bill and Melinda Gates. I have frequently, repeatedly challenged Matt Hancock or Whitty to debate with me on vaccination. And we'll, if they want to bring along even more advisors, that's fine. I will debate with them. Silence. Why won't they debate if they think I'm a nut, or all of us who talk about vaccines with some criticism? And I have never said don't take a vaccine. I've said people are entitled to know the facts about vaccine, and here are the facts as I see them. Well, not as I see them, but here are the facts. Now have a look and make up your own mind. Now, if Matt Hancock really believes that I'm a nut and that vaccines are wonderful, debate with me, prove that I'm an idiot, prove I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'll have to go away and shut up. But the reason why he won't debate with me and why Whitty won't debate with me is because they know they'll lose. It's very easy to argue on my side that vaccines aren't effective. For God's sake, I wrote a book called Anyone Who Says That Vaccines... I'm not giving a plug. I've realised. Anyway, what I said was...
Do give a plug.
No. Vaccines are... anyone who says that vaccines are safe and effective is lying. Now, if that was... it's just absurd. Of course they aren't safe and effective. The flu stuff that they're going to give kids, the nasal flu stuff, if you look at the side effects of that, in America they took it off the market because it was impossible to find that it was any effectiveness at all. The number of health problems that have been caused by flu vaccines, which is the big promo before they get to the big vaccine, the number of health problems with the flu vaccine, look at the record of GSK with all the people who were badly injured by it. The last time they were doing it, or a couple of years ago, the British government paid out £60 million to people who'd been damaged by the flu vaccine because they'd given GSK, I'm sure it was GSK.
Yeah, narcolepsy,
yes, they'd given them immunity. And Gates, of course, is now demanding that all drug companies have immunity for anything, and that all doctors and nurses and anybody else involved with the vaccines has immunity. Well, how wonderful is that? If you were a car company, you'd love it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You'd be immune from any sort of litigation. What is going on? Why are people not noticing? The CDC in America said a few days ago that they'd got the figures for COVID-19 slightly wrong. Just like our government, they'd got them slightly wrong. You know how much wrong? 94%. They reduced the total number of deaths from COVID-19 in America to 9,000, to just over 9,000. It is incredible. It's been proven that the testing, which they're using to have all these lockdowns, is effective less than 50% of the time. Try tossing a coin and see what odds you get. The BBC the other day had a news story saying 25 million people worldwide have now caught this terrible disease. Okay, it is terrible. It can kill some people. Do you know how many people had the flu in an average year? And it's well known now that the flu and the coronavirus have the same sort of death rate. Do you know how many people had the flu? I'll tell you. 1 billion. 1 billion. So with 25 million, if my maths is right, which it probably isn't, that's 1/40th of the number of people who get the flu, and the two have the same sort of mortality rate. It's lunatic. And sorry, I'm getting into a rant.
No, it's important.
It makes me so angry.
Yeah.
All these kids are going to school. It's child abuse what the teachers are doing. They should arrest every damn teacher in the country who insists on kids wearing masks, who insists on putting little squares on the floor, who insists on putting plastic screens around chairs, or who does anything to impede children. It's actually damaging them mentally and physically. And do you know what? The risk to a child of dying from the coronavirus is less than the risk of them dying from chickenpox. It's absurd. What the hell is going on? Why does nobody understand? Why does nobody listen? It's because we go back again
to the media,
to to the media. The Mail ran that terrible story, which you had on your Twitter feed, about claiming that people who won't wear masks are sociopaths. If you read the story all the way down, they'd hidden it on paragraph 22 or 23. The guy who wrote it said, well, it's possible that the people who won't wear masks are psychopaths. Well, it's possible that the people who do wear masks are psychopaths. What a useless piece of research. They did that, not a useless piece of research. What a useless piece of writing. They did that once before, a couple of months ago. They found some guy. I read his paper, which is 36 pages long, I think, and in it he said, I am specifically not saying that people who won't wear masks are psychopaths. I'm specifically not saying that. What did they do? The media wrote it up as, oh gosh, people they saw the words mask and psychopath in the same sentence, and so they came to the completely wrong conclusion. Journalists are a disgrace today. Mainstream journalists are an absolute disgrace.
I don't know how they can sleep at night. I don't know how they can sleep at night. Having lived in that world for long enough, I don't know how they can sleep. And I'm certainly no angel. I'm not, some nice guy or some great guy, but I walked away from commercial media for the very reasons you've just described. I couldn't do it anymore. Lying to people.
Good for you.
And,
Good for you.
Knowingly lying and keeping people off the air. This is the thing. The editors and producers of the mid-morning talk shows on national and commercial radio, they know damn well who Vernon Coleman is. They know damn well who Mohammed Adil is. And, in my day, I'm only 45, it was a question of, right, we've got to get this guy on. We've got to get Vernon Coleman on. Why? Well, I'll tell you why, because he's saying that it's a load of bollocks. And he's qualified, so let's get him on. But now they willfully look the other way. And I can't forgive that. I really can't. It sickens me. If it sickens you, and it must do, as a physician of great respect and renown, it sickens me to almost to tears that they operate in the way they do. And I don't know what we can do about that, because it's all very well 40,000 people going to London, and some of my listeners won't like me saying this. I love that they did, and I love that they stick two fingers up to the establishment. I love it. But something else has got to happen, because that's not being reported on. You saw what they did. They ignored the 3 or 4 renowned scientists and started having a go at the fact that David Icke was there and the Queen is a lizard and all of that nonsense. We've got to do more than that, than just turn up. We've got to do more, I think.
We've got to complain to that. Everybody should go out and buy a packet of envelopes, a pile of stamps, because a letter that actually comes through the mail is taken more seriously than an email, as you know, in newspaper offices and so on. And we've got to make formal complaints every time they get something wrong. I've got a complaint about the Spectator running at the moment. It's taken them nearly a month for the official PCC people, whatever they're called now, the ISO. Whatever. The Spectator ran a story from Matthew Parris in which he said millions of people around the world are dying. Well, obviously millions of people are not dying. Even the World Health Organization, heaven rot its soul, is not saying that millions of people are dying. So I complained to the Spectator. They ignored me, and I made a complaint about the Spectator, and that's now going through channels. It'll take them another 3 months. I nag them every day, and eventually they're hoping I'll go away. We have just got to do that. We've got to keep on making complaints about organizations which keep telling lies and distorting. What I want to know is how many of the people who work for these organizations and work for the media, how many know what's going on? Or are they just stupid? Because to believe that this is a plague, as Andrew Marr said in The Spectator this week, to believe that this is a plague, you've got to have your head in the sand. You just have to look at the statistics. You don't have to listen to any rhetoric. You just look at the facts, and it's plainly not going to be a major killer that's going to kill us all and justifies closing down the economy. They keep saying the economy's been ruined by the plague. It's not. Obviously, the economy's been ruined because it's been closed down. But what I want to know is, how do they recruit people to believe this? There must be some people. Well, I have this vision that government ministers, when MPs go back next week, they'll be recruiting them and say, do you want to join our group? We're gonna take over the world. It's fantastic. Bill and Melinda will give you £1 million signing on fee. Is that how they do it? I don't know. The word connected used to mean that you were in the mafia, and Marlon Brando, Godfather, all sort of stuff. The word connected now means that you've had your £1 million off Bill and Melinda, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, the bloody foundations that are trying to take over the world with wretched Elon Musk and all the rest of them. This is like living in a James Bond movie or one of those terrible Charlton Heston movies. I have no idea how on earth these idiot journalists can write their copy. How did Mariana Spring get to be a BBC, what was it, misinformation reporter?
Yeah, disinformation reporter, yeah.
I don't know. Where did they find her? How did they train her? Did she have... I mean, I don't know what's going on. The BBC, the Mail on Sunday, the Mail, the Guardian, the rest of them. When you actually find a story in a national newspaper that bears some resemblance to the truth, I cut it out and keep it, frame it. Wow, look at that. It's brilliant.
I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny, but it isn't. It is. It's tragic. It's tragi-comedy. We've got Vernon Coleman, Dr. Vernon Coleman, live on the radio show. It's coming up to 5 to 6. Vernon will stay with us for another 10 minutes or thereabouts with his permission. If you haven't been on his YouTube channel before, I can't recommend it highly enough. Not kissing his arse, he is a learned man. He's earned his stripes. Multiple best-selling book author, millions of copies sold around the world, a brilliant website, and wrote for the national press for many years. He's entitled to his opinions. And increasingly, we see his videos being taken down. Other academics who are questioning this nonsense having their videos taken down or their Facebook pages deleted. Let me ask you this. Piers Corbyn was on Good Morning Britain today. He did a decent job in the face of some real provocation from two very hostile presenters. And at one stage, they brought on Dr. Hillary to try and discredit Piers Corbyn further. And Piers kept calm and reiterated that it is his belief, his learned belief, that vaccines are produced very differently today than they used to be in yesteryear, because they wanted to push this, this whole narrative about measles was basically eliminated by vaccines. And Piers said, well, that might very well be the case, but those vaccines were different. And rather than engage him, of course, they shouted him down and tried to make him look like an idiot. Can I ask you about that? What's your qualified opinion, Vernon, about how vaccines are created these days as opposed to previously? Is there a vast difference, a big difference?
There's a huge difference. For one thing, they want to start putting them into food. For another thing, the vaccines that they're planning, RNA and DNA vaccines, will cause genetic modification of the human being. So we'll be like soya beans. And once they've genetically modified us, that's forever. It isn't just this generation, it's the next generation and every generation after that. They want to genetically modify us. Now, that seems to me to be a pretty big issue and something that ought to be talked about. And maybe Dr. Hillary would like to talk to me about it. Ho, ho, ho. Not a chance on this earth that they would have me on to talk about vaccines. They'll bring in Dr. Hillary to talk to Piers Corbyn, who, bless his heart, wonderful speaker, fantastic guy. But he's not a doctor.
He's not a doctor.
I've studied vaccines for over 50 years, and let me tell you, when you look at a graph of how vaccines affected infectious diseases, and you compare it, you see that most infectious diseases were virtually under control by the time the vaccines came in. They were under control because things happened. We had cleaner water. We had better sewage facilities. There was a guy called Dr. John Snow who took the handle off the Broad Street pump in Soho and stopped the cholera. There were things like that were done which massively changed infectious diseases. They talk about death rates and so on, and the drug companies always like to say they've massively improved mortality. That's just another drug company lie. What happened was that in the 19th century, infant mortality was so high that average life expectancy became a lot smaller. So if you had, say, a child of 2 weeks dies and somebody lives to be 100, then the average life expectancy is 50 years. But if a woman has 5 kids and 3 of them die before they reach a year old, and you add those together with somebody who lived to be 100, the average mortality rate is very low. When they managed to stop infant mortality being as hideously high as it was, then the average life expectancy rose dramatically. And average life expectancy hasn't really changed all that much for damn near a century. What's happened is that we've created an awful lot of drugs. One of the things, the piece that YouTube took down off their channel on Sunday was a piece in which I claimed, with evidence, that healthcare today, generally speaking, for most people, is no better than it was 50 years ago. The piece is still on my website because we always put the stuff on the transcripts on the website, so that when YouTube takes them down, which has now become a regular little game, and of course they'll be taking the channel down soon, but when they take them down, people can still read them. And when you look at the evidence, apart from a few drugs, there's been very little progress, really, since Fleming's penicillin. Now, of course, we've got this huge problem that most of the antibiotics don't work because people have overused them, and farmers have been allowed to give them by the ton to their animals because they increase the amount of meat on an animal, and therefore they get more profit out of them. What a wonderful thing that is, because that's really buggered up the way we actually manage to treat infectious diseases. So if you look at all this stuff, you look at all the evidence, vaccination it's really not done all that very much. In fact, in most areas, the harm it does is infinitely greater. In my opinion, I'm not telling people not to be vaccinated. I'm not laying myself open to that charge. What I'm saying is that just look at the evidence. The polio, when they introduced polio vaccines in America originally, the number of people dying of polio increased. The polio vaccine that they're using around the world now, most of the strains of people who get, most of the types of polio that people get is the strain in the vaccine. There's evidence that a lot of vaccines actually cause the disease that you're supposed to be treating. The flu vaccine, the nasal flu vaccine, is a live attenuated vaccine. What that means is it's got about 100 million viruses in it, which is a hell of a lot even for a virus. And when you give that to a child, there's a risk that the viruses will become live again. There's also a risk that the viruses will mutate. They keep telling us that coronaviruses can mutate. Yes, they can, and so can the flu virus. They want to stuff up children's noses because it's a live attenuated virus, which means that it's been weakened a bit, but it's not dead. So it can mutate, it can get stronger, and that's a problem. So then you say to yourself, well, actually, that's what we might call a bit of a downside, because they do say, well, if you give this live attenuated vaccine to small children, don't get children near granny. Why do they say that? Because the kid might give granny the virus, and then they get the flu, and then they die, because the amount of morbidity amongst the elderly with the flu is, of course, the same as the coronavirus, COVID-19, which, incidentally, why do they always put a capital C on the front? Why do they put it in block capitals? It's not, you don't say malaria with a big M, do you? You don't say tuberculosis with a big T. They don't say flu with a big F. COVID has a big C, so we know it's very serious. I forgot what I was saying now. The problem with the live vaccine that you stuff up kids' noses is that it can turn real, it can mutate, and so then you have a problem. And because we know that the vaccines are very often not very effective, in America they were less than 3% effective, so they decided that they couldn't even measure the effectiveness, so they gave up and they stopped using it. Now, if you say, well, it doesn't really work terribly well, but it can actually cause problems, what do you say? Well, it's positive and negative, isn't it? It's good and bad. You have to look at the two. I would love to talk about this with Chris Whitty. I'd love to talk about it with Matt Hancock. Oh, boy, how would I love to talk about it with Matt Hancock. Or Boris, who called us all, I call them pro-vaxxers. He called all anti-vaxxers nuts. Well, come on, Boris. If you think I'm a nut, that must be because you have some information. Come on, talk to me. Let's have a live national television debate between me and Boris. Boris can bring on 1,000 scientists if he wants. I will take them all on. I'm not boasting. I'm just saying that I know a little bit about vaccines. I've been writing about it for 50 years, for heaven's sakes. And I am appalled at the way Matt Hancock, who couldn't get a job in my world, if I was running the planet, he wouldn't get a job as a bloody school prefect. Matt Hancock, that sanctimonious, prissy politician who claims that to know all about vaccines and how wonderful they are, does he know any facts, or is he just full of rhetoric and nonsense? Oh, I hate them.
Yeah, they just repeat what they're given. I saw this come into the media towards the end of my time in Ireland. I had a break from the media after my time in Ireland. Then I went back into commercial media here for a bit, and then in Spain and elsewhere. It's basically, you said it yourself earlier on, now a newsroom will get a press release from a government department, and it won't look for any inconsistencies in that statement. It won't look for any avenues into which they can take it on or challenge it. They will write it into a script and repeat the bastarding thing, excuse my language. That ain't journalism. As a journalist, you get this from the Department for Immigration or from the Home Office, and you look at it and you go, well, I don't trust those creepy bastards. That's what you should think. And you go and investigate it. But they don't do that. They just rewrite it for broadcast, write it into broadcast language, and they bloody read it out. It's shocking.
Absolutely. I've never printed a press release in my life.
No.
H.L. Mencken, do you remember H.L. Mencken, the god of American journalism?
Yeah.
He said, a journalist's job towards politicians is the same as that of a dog on a lamppost. And it is. You have to regard politicians as the lying little shits, excuse my language, as the lying little shits that they are. You have to assume that they're lying, and you have to regard everything they tell you as something that's a piece of propaganda. And then you look for the truth, because hiding the truth is the politician's job. A journalist's job is discovering the truth, wherever it might hide, and printing it, whatever the risk to your livelihood. Journalists who say, oh, well, I'll lose my job if I say, oh, for heaven's sakes, where's your passion? Where's your joy? Where's your ambition? Where's your hope? Where's your purpose?
Yeah.
It's the same with, there are still thousands, tens of thousands of doctors who know that this is a hoax. They have to. If they don't, if there's a doctor in Britain who doesn't know that this is a hoax, then he shouldn't be practicing as a doctor, because the evidence is so plain. Why aren't they all speaking out? Why are they all just buttering away? You see all these little kids now. Why aren't doctors saying you don't need to do anything in the schools? I saw pictures of kids going in school. They were walking the statutory 6 foot 6 inches apart. They were, I refuse to do meters, they were walking 6 foot 6 inches apart. Their heads were bowed. I tell you what it reminded me of, Richie. I tell you what it reminded me of. Old black and white shots of people in concentration camps. That's what it reminded me of, and it made me so angry. My wife was in tears this morning because she knows the kids are going back to school today, and she just felt so sorry for them. And to be honest, if I had children, they would not be going back to school in those circumstances.
Not under those circumstances. You know, it's amazing.
Sack all the teachers.
It's amazing you said that. Nicky Campbell, Radio 5 Live, was interviewing a fellow BBC presenter who actually happens to be a virologist. The name escapes me, or does it? I've got it here. Chris Smith, yeah. Anyway, long story short, Campbell said, I'm at home at the moment and not in Salford because my 21-year-old daughter has had COVID. So now I've got to isolate. And then he said the immortal words, Vernon. He said, it didn't even brush her. She just felt a bit tired for a day. And I'm screaming at the radio, or I'm screaming at my tiny phone, which I'm listening to the radio on as I'm in Buell Park in Salford this morning. I'm screaming at Campbell, and nobody, of course, is listening. Yes, you muppet, yes. Your 21-year-old daughter got it and she hardly knew she had it. That's the same for the majority of us. You cretin. But no, he's happy to isolate in his home now for the next few weeks and broadcast from there and not be at Media City. It's dreadful stuff. It's 8 minutes past the hour. We've got another 3 minutes at tops with Dr. Vernon Coleman. Do check out the old man in a chair on YouTube while it's still there. Just look for Vernon Coleman. The website is vernoncoleman.com. And I don't give an arse. Buy the books. The books are fantastic, and I'm saying that from personal experience. Read these books. They are as relevant today as they ever were. Vernon Coleman, our guest. give us a little bit of positivity. Maybe the 40,000 in Trafalgar Square on Saturday, and it might be 70,000 on the 26th of September. I could get the date wrong, but I'll check it and I'll clarify. Maybe this is the beginning of something. Maybe people are saying no. What do you think?
I think so too. I think every night at the end of the video, whenever they are, I always say we will win this war, and we will. We will win it, but we have to be tough because the other side is relentlessly tough. We have to make complaints every time we see anything in the media. We have to complain because they will respond. They're getting another 3 months of government advertising money, so they're creeping to the government. Explain to them that at the end of those 3 months, we won't be buying their newspaper, we won't be watching their channel, we will be campaigning for the BBC to be defunded. And I'm afraid, I know the arguments about the PSYOPs want to divide us, but we have to regard the people who wear masks, particularly when they don't have to wear masks, we have to regard them as collaborators. The French resistance in the Second World War, and this is a war, the French resistance didn't say, oh, you are naughty going and being nice to the Germans. They didn't say that. They tar and feathered them, and then sometimes they killed them. Well, we can't do that, but we can actually exclude them. We can snarl at them. I snarl at people in the streets and shops and stuff if they're wearing a mask and they look a bit pompous, especially if they're wearing those stupid fashion masks. And I loathe those celebrities who wear their masks and say, oh, I've got a new mask for a new outfit. Oh, for heaven's sake, You're a slave, you're an idiot. Don't you look at the facts? Don't you understand anything? And what about these Z-list celebrities who've been paid tens of thousands of pounds to put by the NHS to put little stuff on social media saying, oh, go and have your test. What do you want to have a test for? It's wrong most of the time. They're less than 50% accurate.
By their own admission,
most of the positives are false positives. They want all the false positives so that they can lock down. Come to your town, do lots of tests, and lock you down to scare you until the ready vaccine is ready so that they can give you that with whatever the hell's in it. And don't forget, the vaccine will genetically modify you. It's going to be an RNA or DNA vaccine. It will genetically modify you. Look at the facts about the people who are making this. The facts are scary. Really scary. These companies have paid out billions of dollars for fraud, for lying, for cheating, for covering up. They've paid out billions. I've named the companies on my website and on my channel. And I couldn't do that if it was, you know damn well, I'd be sued out of kingdom come if I got them wrong. But just look at the facts and then say to yourself, would I trust these people? Oh, God, you wouldn't trust them any more than you trust Matt Hancock.
Vernon, lovely to have you back on again today. Thanks for coming on. There was a number of people got in touch with me over the weekend. It was put out there, probably with the best of intentions, but it was wrong. It was put out there that Vernon was going to be in Trafalgar Square on Saturday, and he wasn't, because I got some emails on Sunday asking where are you, but that was just some sort of confusion. But look, thanks for coming on.
I did get an invitation, but it only arrived on the. I got a very nice, very honoured official invitation, but it only came on the Tuesday before the Saturday.
Not enough time, yeah.
And I'm a long way up from London, and I couldn't possibly have got there. And if I had managed to get there, there wouldn't have been any videos for several days because I'd have had to stay for 3. Anyway, it was all a bit complicated, but. That's what happened. But they didn't need me there. They got zillions of really fantastic people. And I hope the people who were libelled by the BBC will take a big chunk of money off them because it'll help to pay for the fines that the police are giving the organisers.
Brilliantly said. Thanks again for coming on. Go to youtube.com if you haven't already. Vernon Coleman. You've just got to put Vernon's name in. You'll find the old man in the chair. Video, blogs, vlogs they call them. But they're essential because he's a learned voice. He's earned his stripes and the right to challenge that which you're seeing on BBC and Sky on a daily basis. I look forward to the next one of these when you have time. Thanks for coming back on, Vernon.
Thanks very much for asking me, Richie. Cheers, mate.
Bye for now. The lovely Dr. Vernon Coleman live on the Richie Allen radio show for today, Tuesday, September 1st, from his home. And yeah, a number of people got in touch with me and he said, "Oh, Richie, we heard that Vernon was going to be there and he wasn't there." They threw an invite to him, the people who organised it. I don't know who organised it, to be honest. And I think they might have assumed that he was going to be there. And for those of you who do only hear part sentences and not the entire thing, I have great respect for people who march and who protest, and I would not disencourage it in the slightest. I think historically we've seen that you need to do more than that. I made a comment to a friend of mine that might have been a bit harsh. I saw a video that was taken in Manchester about 3 weeks ago, and there was a guy standing there singing a song in front of a crowd of people, and he was singing, "You can stick your poison vaccines up your arse." And I've been around a bit. You know, when I was younger, before making my own way and figuring certain things out for myself, I would have had a lot of time for politicians working for left-wing parties, you know, be it Sinn Féin, the Labour Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, before I realised it was all a load of bollocks and it didn't matter, that it's all the same side of the same, with two sides of the same coin and all of that. But I would have done that. And I've been on the marches. The elite is not scared of marches. It's not scared of people singing songs about sticking vaccines up your arse. Because ultimately when you go to a march, and it's good to do it, and show, look, there are tens of thousands of people, even if the BBC ignores it. It's good. I'm not criticising it. But ultimately, historically, we go home. That's what we do. We go back to communities. Because you're coming from all over the country, you go back to your own community. Or communities. And that's where you need to do things. That's where the civil disobedience needs to happen. And I want to explore that theme in the programme in the coming weeks. So don't be rearing up now if you went to London on Saturday and you think I'm criticising you. No, I commend you for doing it. But I ultimately don't think it makes any difference. Long term, it doesn't. And that's one of the reasons why I've been invited to do one or two things, come to this protest, Richie, and speak. And I said, look, no, and this is the reason why. But it was heartening to see so many people there on Saturday, and maybe in a few weeks' time when another one is planned, maybe the audience will double, maybe, or the protesters will double in number. Right, I'm going to take a tune and then I'm going to get my next guest on. He's standing by. This is Stevie Wonder on the Richie Allen Radio Show. It's really good to be back with you. Tuesday, September 1st. The time is 17 minutes past the hour. Brian Sylvester, 40-odd years serving the people of Crewe and Nantwich, former council leader. He'll be with me in 2.5 minutes' time. Right, let's get into it then. Stevie Wonder, Part-Time Lover. We'll cut it shorter than we would ordinarily cut it. So we've got some more time with my next guest there. Thought I had him, in fact, but he's just disappeared. Maybe I'll get him to give me a ring. Let's ring me, please. Oh, you gotta love live radio when you're on your lonesome, when you're on your Todd. You ain't got anybody in the middle studio. You ain't got anybody in the booth doing stuff for you. But my next guest got in touch with me. He dropped me an email, which I picked up when I was looking for another email. Because when I'm on my holidays, as I said earlier on, I don't pay any attention to the job or the media or the news. But I was looking for an email from a friend of mine, also called Brian. And I came across an email from Brian Sylvester, who's been a councillor. Not right now he isn't, but he has been for over 40 years in the Crewe and Nantwich area. And he's also got a very huge, very big following on social media. And he's very engaging on there is Brian. And he got in touch with the programme. And I'm glad that he did. Because he is... he's formed a new party, or a recent party, called Putting Crewe First. And that's getting a lot of traction, as I said, on social media. He's very concerned about Brexit, and he's not convinced that Brexit is real, and that what Boris Johnson is actually going to do is give us a Brexit in name only. That's a fear I share myself, but anyway. But he's also been... the local press has reported on a campaign that he's running about accident and emergency in hospitals in his area, because apparently walk-ins to accident and emergency, or casualty as we used to call it, will be banned from November as part of these new COVID measures. So to talk about that and about lockdown itself, let's welcome to the programme Councillor Brian Sylvester. Brian, welcome to the programme and thanks for reaching out to us. How are you?
I'm well, Richie. How are you?
I'm really well, mate. Thanks for getting in touch and thanks for coming on. So you've been serving the people of Crewe for, I think, nearly 45 years. In your wildest dreams, Brian, did you imagine that you would be witnessing the events unfold, the ones that have unfolded since March, the lockdown, the resulting effects of that on the economy, children being out of school for 6 months? Did you ever imagine you'd be here talking about this?
What we are experiencing is the biggest scam in the history of the world. And Vernon Coleman, your previous guest, was absolutely right. It's incredible what is going on. But I think more and more people are beginning to see through this nonsense.
I'll ask you, I didn't ask him because I've had this out with him before. When I had him on the first time, I gave him more of a chasing, shall we say, than I did today. But I'll ask you, as you're like myself, you're a layman, why are you so convinced that the government's own advisors, be it the SAGE committee, many of these men and women, very well respected academics, decades in Ivy League universities, why, if you can sum it up for us as quick as you can, we've got loads of time but we've got lots to talk about, why do you think they're wrong? What's the straw that broke the camel's back for you, Brian?
Well, it's absolutely clear there was no need for the lockdown. The lockdown was a disaster, is a disaster, and it's caused millions of people to be unemployed and thousands of businesses are closed, never to reopen. And if you look at the timeline for the lockdown, it's very interesting. The peak infection rate, that's the infection rate, not infection, infection rate was on the 4th of March. And then on the 18th of March, as we know, the government declared themselves that on the 21st of March, they declared themselves that the virus was not a high consequential infectious disease. That's on the 21st of March. So all the pointers were to not lock down. And also don't forget, when the minutes were actually disclosed, thanks to Simon Dolan, who's been on your show several times, when the minutes of the SAGE committee, the scientist committee, were disclosed, it was clear from them that they were not advising the lockdown. So all the pointers were to not lock down, to do what Sweden did. But no, 2 days after we were told that it was of no consequence, old Boris locked down, and with all the consequences that has brought about. So why did he do it? That's the big question.
This is the $64 million.
There's no need.
And as you're a politician and you are a parish councillor even to this day. And I know you're a Conservative politician. So that is the $64 million question. Why then? If Johnson and Hancock and the rest of the front bench, if they know this is unnecessary, why? What do you think the reason is?
Well, I think when you look at what's happening across the world, it's very, very strange that virtually all the leaders in most of the countries are doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. And even some of the words that they utter are the exact same words. So all this has been very carefully planned, and that they are following, I'm afraid, they are following orders, and it seems quite clear that the virus is not. It's a bad year for the flu, as Vernon Coleman says. It's not something where we should have locked down, but it's being used. It's being used for a purpose, and what is that purpose? The purpose clearly is to try and get everybody to have this vaccine. Then you've got to wonder if they're willing to close down the world's economy for a vaccine. What on earth is in this vaccine?
Would you have been the type of person, Brian, because I've done a bit of research on you, and like all politicians, you have your supporters and you have your enemies. I don't care too much about your enemies, to be honest. I mean, I've read a lot about you, but what I didn't find in looking into your background was I didn't find any previous incidences of you talking about vaccines, at least not before the lockdown, and maybe it's because I didn't find them. But I'm guessing, I'm going a long way around saying this, you wouldn't have been the sort of person that would have had too many concerns about vaccine or vaccine schedules before this whole pandemic. Would I be right in saying that?
Absolutely right. I've not been concerned at all. I had a flu vaccine last year. I can tell you now, I won't be having any more vaccines because what I've learned, people have only just got to do the research. One of the good things about social media, Google, etc., is that people can easily do the research. And when you look at the research, there are so many alarm bells that begin to ring about vaccines that you begin to wonder.
It's very interesting hearing you say that. I couldn't find any info today, and I knew that you wouldn't have been an anti-vaxxer, as they are being called. I knew that. So this is a real massive change for you in terms of your perception. And I want to stay with that for a minute, because I'm getting a lot of correspondence from people emailing through the website, people who are bewildered, people who say that if you'd suggested to them a couple of years ago that vaccines might be harmful, or some of them, or even that there is an agenda to get more and more vaccines into people, they're telling me that they would have scoffed at that. They would have laughed it out of town. But now, seeing what's unfolding, they can no longer, ignore it, that they've got to acknowledge that there's something going on. How do you find that in your own peer group, Brian, then? Your fellow councillors, your colleagues, the people you would have been working with for years, are they of a similar mindset to you now, or are they inclined to be like, Brian, don't be crazy, it's a conspiracy theory?
I think the scepticism is growing, thankfully. One of the problems, of course, is that you've got the media, which is fully paid up by the government in terms of the advertising they spend from the government to the BBC and to the media in general, that we're getting just one narrative, which is the government narrative, and it's difficult to break through that. But we are breaking through that, and thank goodness we've got social media. But as we've learnt from your previous interview, it is being censored.
Yeah, at a blinding pace, really, a gathering pace. We're seeing it everywhere. Brian Sylvester is our guest. Brian has been involved in politics in Crewe and Nantwich for the best part of 45 years. He's led Crewe and Nantwich Council on a couple of occasions. He's a parish councillor at the moment, but he's very well known in the area. And it's good to have him on talking about this. How you can speak then from an economic point of view, Brian, you can speak about Crewe. What has it done to commerce in Crewe, this lockdown?
Well, Crewe has been suffering long before the lockdown. The lockdown really has been just the top of the problem, and it's just increased it dramatically because obviously the whole town was shut down except for food and essentials. It's now reopened again, but it's nowhere near as good as it was, and probably sadly never will be. The travesty is the lockdown was not necessary. The lockdown has resulted in millions of people losing jobs, thousands of businesses being put out of business, and they will never reopen. And all that was totally unnecessary, and there's no need to do it.
It can't be ignored. Again, in the absence of me challenging you and putting the other side to you, I won't waste anybody's time by doing that, because it can't be ignored that, yes, back in early March, they downgraded it as not a high consequence disease. It can't be ignored that their own advice was not to lock down. We can't ignore Neil Ferguson's laughable projections at the outset about how many people might die from it. His models, and this was a guy who had a history of dodgy modelling in the past. None of this can be ignored. And of course, recently they acknowledged that many people were being counted as having died of COVID, when in fact they died of something else after having COVID at some time. So it is a nonsense. Why then are people like Boris Johnson going along with it? Now, I know you can't get into the mind of Boris Johnson, but could it be that Johnson is so power hungry? Could it be that he's so narcissistic, that he loves being the Prime Minister, that this outweighs everything? Or is there something else going on? Why doesn't Johnson go on television and say, I tell you what, guys, this is a load of bollocks, this, excuse my language, and it's destroying the country, so I've got to speak up, I'm calling a halt to it. Why isn't he doing that? What's going on?
I can only assume that Boris, like so many other leaders across the world, are just following orders. And the order is you've got to make out this virus is far, far worse than what it actually is. You've got to tell lies about the death rates, tell lies about the positive tests. And now we've got this crazy situation, which is so incredible that if it wasn't serious, it would be laughable, where old Hancock, Health Secretary, is now saying that he's going to have 4 million tests a day. That's just totally ridiculous, unbelievable. Yeah. First of all, what on earth is all that costing? And secondly, we know full well the only reason that is being done is to throw up yet more false positives. So the media, the lapdog media to the government can say, oh, dear me, what a big problem we've got now that people are testing positive for this COVID virus, and we'll have to lock down again, or lock down the country, or lock down an area, or lock down a city, as we've already seen. So it's being used for a purpose. Why on earth would they test for 4 million? And the ironical thing is that when Hancock announced it, he said, well, we must test 4 million a day to get people back to business, get people back to work. Well, Mr. Hancock, you're doing the opposite by testing and throwing up false positives. All you're doing is giving an excuse for yourself to lock down. That's not helping business. That's not helping people get back to work.
It's bewildering, isn't it, that more people aren't asking themselves the question, if this is such a deadly, dangerous disease, why do they need to test people to find out if they have it? If it's so bad, surely we would see people with it, but nobody is witnessing anybody with it. I ask people all the time in Salford, and I really do, I'm not just saying this, I inquire when I'm in the parks, when I'm out and about, do you know anybody who's sick? Have you been sick? And invariably the answer is no.
I say, I'm also in the same situation. I don't know of anybody who's had it at all. And don't forget, what you've got to look at is the figures. You don't get the cold figures on the media, but the cold figures are this, that if you look at the world as a whole, 99.99% of the world's population has not died from this virus.
And might have it. You'll remember one of the briefings that Chris Whitty gave. I took the briefing and analysed it and stuck it on YouTube, and it was deleted, and I don't care about that. And others did the same. It was where Whitty basically gave the game away. You'll remember the briefing. He said, first of all, very few people get this. Of the very few who get it, very few, again, will even show symptoms. Of the ones who do, very few, again, will be really sick. And he just kept diluting it all the way down. And he was essentially saying, there's nothing to worry about here. It's astonishing. And you mentioned the 4 million tests, Brian. Brian Sylvester is live on the line from Crewe. He's decades long, not to be giving his age away, but he served the people of Crewe and Antibiotic for many years in local politics. And the millions of tests that they're ordering and what they want to do, and they've admitted this, and you alluded to it, they're saying that anybody who works in, key positions, they want to be testing them every couple of weeks. And I put forward this as a possibility. The reason they want to test 4 million people a day is, eventually, they want every one of us, whether you're working on the so-called front line, which is laughable, or if you're just me, who's an independent guy in Salford, they want us all to be tested fairly regularly for it. That's what they want to do. They want to introduce this regime where every couple of weeks you might need, or maybe every month, you might need to get tested again for the digital health passport, Brian.
Yeah, but did you see where people are now actually being paid to have the test? They're being paid £25 a time, and they can have up to 16 tests a year. That's so they get £400 £4,000 for all these tests.
I don't.
£400, yeah.
Again, I've got to ask you. These are the things that are happening now. Used to be the figments of the imagination of science fiction writers. We'd watch old science fiction films that imagine a very bleak future. We're bloody well here now, Brian, or we're nearly there.
Well, we are, and it's all about control. It's about taking away our freedom and controlling us. And what's happening in the UK, and even worse in countries like Australia and New Zealand. There was a case in New Zealand recently where a mother and a daughter were in some sort of isolation place where they've been forced to go into isolation for 14 days. The father died, so they escaped from the isolation place, and they ended up in prison for 14 days.
Yeah.
This is just madness. And then in New Zealand, with a population of 5 million, they've had 26 deaths. People have gone mad. They've gone insane.
And they'll tell you things like today, both of our 24-hour news channels, the ones based here anyway, the BBC and Sky, both of them had the chart out today showing in such and such a city 26 positive tests in every 100,000 people. Now just imagine Wembley Stadium. I mean, it's laughable. And you've got 26 people in Wembley Stadium. You could lose 26 people.
Yeah.
And of those 26, they're not sick. These are not sick people. They're saying that they found the virus in their systems. And it goes on and on and on. And this whole thing about freedom of movement and stuff, the passport.
But today, the kids going back to school, the kids should never have been stopped from going to school. But thank goodness they're going back to school. But when you look at the figures, the figures show that the kids are more likely to die by being hit by lightning.
Yeah.
And the teachers are more likely to die driving in their car to the school.
Let me ask you this,
Brian. It really is absurd.
Let me ask you this. Brian Sylvester is our guest. We'll talk about the changes to accident and emergency at Leighton Hospital in a moment, because that's very important, that. And I didn't know anything about that till you got in touch with me. On local politics, it seems that the government wants to give as much authority in terms of enforcing localised lockdowns to local council, to Crewe and Antibiotic Council, to Manchester Council. Is there any hope that at local government level that there might be some pushback against this, or is it the case that local politicians, councillors are just happy to go along with what the government is doing?
I have seen one example where there was pushback. I think it was in Aberdeen, but there was one council that pushed back and said, no, we're not going to do it. And good for them, because there is absolutely no need. There's no need for any of these lockdowns. It's just nonsense.
Now tell me about A&E. This is huge, because decisions are being made at the moment, and Matt Hancock did say today that plans to help protect the NHS this coming winter in the event of a so-called second COVID spike and a bad flu season. He said they've got these plans, they're going to publish them next week sometime, and you came across yourself plans to stop walk-ins to accident and emergency. Now, I can't get my head round that. Casualty is there for when people have accidents and they need immediate attention, and I've never heard of anybody I've never heard of any idea where that should be stopped and that people would have to phone or email. Tell us more about this. This is concerning stuff, this.
This was a proposal that was in the Times at the end of July, and it was called by the head of NHS England a profound change, and it certainly is a profound change, because what they're proposing is that you cannot, from November, you cannot just walk in to your local A&E. This is for the whole of England, and similar is happening in Wales, similar is happening in Northern Ireland. I'm not heard from about Scotland, but probably Scotland the same. So it's happening across the UK. You will not be allowed to walk into A&E. You'd have to ring for an appointment, and it makes a nonsense of accident, and especially the emergency bit. What nonsense it makes of it. But what really gets me, Richie, is that this is a profound change, and nobody, certainly no political party, is actually raising a dicky bird about it. I'm the only politician who's jumping up and down and saying we must stop this, because you must realise that round about 65% of the people who go to A&E are walk-ins. So this is a dramatic reduction in the A&E service. Now, and what the government are doing, and it's quite clear and obvious, as anybody who wants to see, is that obviously got a list in the drawer of the desk somewhere where these projects which they daren't bring forward because people would laugh them out of court or ridicule them or force them out of office. But now they're bringing forward these proposals which they wouldn't dare bring forward before, and using the cover of COVID to bring them in. And this is just one example where using the cover of COVID, they're now going to dramatically reduce the A&E. And what on earth are the Labour Party doing about this? Why not a dicky bird from the Labour Party? They keep going on about the NHS, but here we have the Tory government dramatically reducing the NHS service, and not a word.
Not a word. You might ask the question about a political party that allegedly represents the working man and working woman, why it's gone along with the decision to lock down and to shut down the economy, and is basically clapped along most of the way with the Labour Party, apart from some kind of minor disagreements. In fact, where Labour is concerned, their current position seems to be that the lockdown didn't happen soon enough, and that maybe we came out of lockdown too soon.
But what we're seeing, Richie, is that where there is some minor opposition, all it is about, as you say, is they'll say, oh, well, you should have shut down earlier, or you should have done that later or earlier. It's all nitpicking. On the fundamentals of this lockdown, there is no opposition. Boris has got a 650 majority. He's got no opposition. This is a scandal. I've never seen anything like this in the 44 years I've been in as a councillor. I've never seen a parliament where there's no opposition at all. And don't forget, the lockdown will kill around about 5 times as many people as this virus.
And that's their own figures. They said, and I know that I saw this press release myself about 4 weeks ago. They said potentially and conservatively, no pun intended, 200,000 people might die. They're claiming that 40,000 have died of the virus, but they've even admitted that's a nonsense. Yeah. It's a nonsense, because they admitted that if you got killed by a car after you've had COVID, you'll be listed as COVID. And we saw those leaked NHS emails where people are being encouraged to list COVID as the cause of death, even if they just suspect it.
You've got to ask the question, why are the hospitals still half empty? Yeah. We're 5 months since the lockdown. Why are the hospitals still half empty, especially when there are hundreds of thousands of people who are dying unnecessarily because they can't get into the hospital? The waiting list, we saw the figure recently, the waiting list for the NHS, it's gone up to something like 15 million. It's incredible. Now, we've got to actually tackle that backlog, but they're making no attempt to tackle the backlog. Or they're saying, there's going to be a second wave. We've got to get ready for the second wave. And there's not going to be a second wave. It's over. This is over. But the government is not allowing it to be over. And that's why they're doing the 4 million tests a day, because they want to have the excuse to carry this on to force us to have the vaccine. That's what it's all about.
If Johnson and, let's say, not Leo Varadkar anymore, Micheál Martin, of course, is the new Irish Taoiseach. If Johnson and Martin and Macron in France and Merkel, if they're all taking orders, this is not a loaded question. Who's given the orders then? Is it the World Health Organization? Is it special interest groups? Is it massive pharmaceutical companies who've got lobbyists in the capital cities? Who's doing it? Who's given the orders? Well,
you've got to look to the UN. You've got to look to the World Health Organization. Certainly with the UN, you've got Agenda 2021, you've got Agenda 2030, you've got the New World Order. And it's all there. If you want to go and look at it, it's all on the website. And this is the plan, and this is what they want to do. Their ultimate aim, obviously, is world government. That's what they want. And sadly, the leaders have all signed up. This is what many of your listeners won't realise, is that they've all signed up to this 2021, this 2030 nonsense, and they've all signed up to it, and they are quietly bringing it into being. And those are the orders that they're following now.
What about ordinary men and women going along with it to the point that they were quite content to phone the police to basically dob in their neighbours who might have been on holiday or who might have had a house party. I was told in Buell Hill Park in Salford this morning, I was told confidentially by a chap that he believes one of his own neighbours rang the police to complain that he had some people around for some Sunday lunch on Sunday, and they had some Sunday lunch in the garden. This is an elderly gentleman now, so they didn't have music on and, you know, flashing lights or anything. They had some food and some drink, and local police officer turned up and said, look, you can't be doing this, and we're going to have to take your details and all this sort of stuff. I mean, has that surprised you that people have willingly done things like that? I mean, I hear about people fighting in supermarkets, not necessarily fisticuffs, but people screaming at one another because some bloke is not wearing a mask. I mean, I thought British people, I thought Irish people were made of sterner stuff, Brian. I must be wrong.
No, I agree. I'm surprised at people snitching on people like this. It smacks of the East European Stasi and all these sort of people, and we don't want that in our country. But why is it happening? It's happening because we've got a media who are constantly, day after day, pumping out all this stuff about how dangerous all this is. But in reality, the danger's over. The number of deaths now is very low, less than 10 a day now, and very soon it'll be down to 0. You got to look at the number of people in hospital with COVID. It's the lowest ever, and they will keep reducing. And so there's no problem in those terms. And so what the government are doing, they are artificially trying to scare people by doing the testing and saying, oh, look, we've got all these thousands of positive tests.
And tell us, Brian, what if this goes unchallenged in terms of if it isn't properly challenged? Again, I want to go back to the protests and demonstrations. Brilliant. I applaud. I don't criticise. But it's never on its own ever done anything. It needs to be more. People need to take civil disobedience into their homes, into their streets. That's what I believe. It's just my opinion. If it doesn't get dealt with, are we looking at a world in the next couple of years where your ability to travel, your ability to work maybe, is determined by whether or not your vaccine passport is up to date? Is that where we're going if we don't do something about this?
It is where we're going, and people need to open their eyes. I think more people are opening their eyes, and people say, oh, well, they can't force you to have a vaccine. Well, what they'll do, they'll say, right, okay, we're not going to force you. But if you want to leave your house, you'll have to have the vaccine. So it'd be forced by any other name.
Coercion. You know, I'm not the greatest of prophets, me. I'm certainly not. But yeah, I saw coercion really from the beginning. I don't think they'd be stupid enough to try and insist that people turn up to their local GP to have it and then punish them financially for not I don't think they'll do that. But yeah, I think life would be fairly unbearable. And look, the company leading the race to develop digital health passports is actually based at Manchester University here. You've even got the Premier League, Brian, saying, yeah, we like the idea that fans can come back if they can show that they're healthy on their phones. I genuinely, despite some of the people I've interviewed over the years, despite the books I've read, I'm still pinching myself. I can't believe this is going on.
Yeah, but again, what we're seeing in the last few days is this thing about the government are saying that they're quite willing to bring in a vaccine which isn't licensed, which is very scary indeed. And it's interesting what they're doing there, which many people won't have picked up, is that they're saying that we need to take the power to use this vaccine even though it's not licensed, because until the next year, when we come out of the EU totally, hopefully, we'll see if that happens. But until next year, they've got to get it licensed via the EU. And if they can't do that, they want to actually do it themselves, but not be licensed. But what that does show you is that when the government want to ignore the rules and regulations of the EU, they're quite willing to do so. But when you look at the number of illegal immigrants coming across the channel, for example, at the moment, double the previous year, over 4,000 so far this year. The government said, oh, no, sorry, we can't do anything about that. It's until we come out of the EU properly, then we can't do anything about it. But of course they can do something about it if he wanted to, just as they can do something about the vaccines. That they can ignore the EU when it suits them, but not when it doesn't.
Yeah, and a very important point to make on the vaccines again is Matt Hancock knowingly, I mean, he must have known he was lying when he told the House of Commons today that the MHRA is an independent organisation. It isn't. It's taking money from Bill and Melinda Gates, and I barely dug into that to find that it's taken $360,000 last September. So it couldn't be independent. Do us a favour, Brian, come back on soon to talk about Brexit, because obviously that's very... And I wonder, and I'm not saying this now, I did say this way back in March, I wonder, when these agendas happen, like this pandemic, or hoax, as Vernon Coleman has called it, I know you believe it's a hoax as well, I believe that there are often multiple payoffs. And it wouldn't surprise me if one of the payoffs, the planned payoffs, was to just basically scrap the whole idea of Brexit, and to extend. We get to November. You heard mumblings today from the Conservative Party that those dastardly European negotiators are dragging their feet and they're being very rude. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to mid to late October, early November, if there isn't a huge clamour for yet another postponement or another delay, and to blame it all on COVID. And let's all be friends. Let's all fight the virus together. Give us a final word on that, and let's get you back on soon to talk about Brexit as a wider issue. But a final word on COVID and Brexit.
Yeah, on Brexit, most people don't realise even now, and when the 17.4 million do realise, they're going to be really angry because Boris has signed us up to Brexit in name only. That's quite clear what he's done, and so we're not leaving the EU dictators. They're going to still have power and control over us. In my view, the international treaty which Boris signed back in January, he should unsign it, and he should say, right, okay, we're going to go for no deal, and we're coming out on no deal. That's what he should do. I don't think he will, but that's what he should do. That's what people voted for in the referendum. But the treachery, the lies from this man Johnson is incredible.
Do me a favour, come back on to talk about that in more detail.
We'll do, Richie. Enjoyed it.
No, thanks, Brian. And Brian is on Twitter. I mentioned earlier on he's got a huge Twitter following. So if you want to follow him, I recommend you check him out. It's at Cllr. That's the abbreviation of councillor. So it's at Cllr B Sylvester. And it's Silvester. You'll find a tweet from me to Brian in a minute, so you can follow Brian from there. At Cllrb Sylvester, at Councillor Brian Sylvester, or if you just look for Councillor Brian Sylvester, you'll find him. Pleasure to meet you, Brian. Thanks for giving us your thoughts today. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Richie.
Look after yourself. Bye for now. Brian Sylvester live on the Richie Allen Radio Show, 7 minutes to the top of the hour. Enjoy chatting with Brian. Do check him out on Twitter there. Yeah. Yeah. Imagine it. Imagine 4 million tests a day they want to do. 60 million people living in the country. They want to test people over and over and over again. And they want to introduce the reality. They want to create, I use this term all the time, they want to create the paradigm where it'll be normal for people, where it'll be accepted as normal to be constantly tested for viruses. Right? 6-7 months ago, you go back in time, get into your time machine, go back 6-7 months, go back 9 months, 10 months, and tell somebody or suggest to somebody, hey, I tell you what, in a couple of years' time, or in a year's time, we'll be expected to be regularly tested for viruses and bugs and stuff like that. And that information will be stored on our own health passport, which won't be like your little paper cardboard passport you carry around. No, it'll be stored on your device, that information, your phone or your tablet, your phone or your smartwatch or whatever, and that can be read by machines placed at the entrance to public buildings. Now, if you'd have said that to somebody 10 months ago, they'd have laughed you out of town. But this is the reality now. This is where they want to go with it. Hancock said today that people who work in social care or who work in health, that could be people who work in hospitals, people who work in GPs' offices, it could be people who work in pharmacies, people who work in care homes. So you're talking hundreds of thousands of people. They can now expect to be tested every couple of weeks. That's their reality. Forever. Or as long as they're working. Yeah. Schedule you for your test. That information stored on your digital passport, and that determines the scope of, the breadth of your movements, your ability to move around. We're here now, is where we are. You know? So yeah. I don't know. 5 minutes it is now to the top of the hour. It's been good being back today. Good being back. Hectic day. It's always hectic. It's always crazy hectic when you come back from your holiday. You've got so much to do. I tried to do a bit yesterday, returning emails and stuff, but I didn't. But before I go, I want you to hear this. Thanks for the tweets today as well, by the way. And do let me remind you that Tony Gosling and Piers Corbyn will be the guests on tomorrow's programme. It's Wednesday's programme tomorrow.
Renowned healer Mark Bajewski travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Bajewski is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbajewski.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Yeah, massive thanks to the brilliant Mark Bajewski for his support of this programme, not just this programme, but the independent media in general. One of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Top man is Mark. That's it for Tuesday's programme. Chris Busby, Dr. Chris Busby, will be with me on Thursday. I mentioned Tony G tomorrow and Piers Corbyn tomorrow. He'll have more news, Piers Corbyn, about the legal action that he's been threatened with, the £10,000 fine for being at the protest in Trafalgar Square on Saturday. We'll get into that and more with Piers tomorrow. Thanks again to Brian Sylvester. Enjoyed meeting Brian. And to Vernon Coleman. Go to youtube.com and look for Vernon Coleman. You'll find the old man in the chair series of videos. Get them, watch them, share them while they are still there. Okay, lovely stuff. Closing out with this from Bruce Springsteen. Until tomorrow, from me, Richie Allen, the BBG. It's bye now. Thanks for listening. Love being back with you.